Her smile stayed with me long after I had stepped fully into the apartment. The sofa seemed to mold around her figure, and for a moment, I just stood there, unsure whether to move or speak. The faint aroma of jasmine and coffee intertwined, grounding me in the unexpected intimacy of this quiet living room. I felt a strange pull, a curiosity tempered by a flicker of nervous hesitation. "I wasn't expecting you so soon," she said, her voice calm but warm, carrying an effortless rhythm that made the room feel softer, lighter. Her eyes met mine again, lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessary. It was subtle, almost accidental, yet it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't anticipated. I noticed the delicate tilt of her head, the way sunlight caught in her hair, and the gentle curve of her lips as she waited for me to respond. I cleared my throat. I saw the key," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed a slight edge of tension. I didn't want to just leave it there. She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that didn't demand attention, but somehow made it impossible not to notice. "I suppose it's thoughtful of you," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her fingers lingered near her cheek for a moment, and I found myself watching, more captivated by the simple movement than I wanted to admit. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, comments about the weather, the neighborhood, and my landlady's habitual forgetfulness. But beneath the surface, something unspoken began to form. Every small glance, every slight movement carried weight. The way she tilted her head when listening, the faint brush of her hand against the book as she shifted, the way her eyes flicked toward mine just before she looked away, all of it was quietly magnetic. I felt my own gestures becoming conscious. I adjusted the strap of my bag more than once, ran a hand through my hair, and subtly mirrored her posture, almost instinctively. The air between us carried an unspoken awareness of proximity. Not invasive, not inappropriate, but undeniably intimate. Every second stretched longer than it should have, each one carrying a tiny charge of tension that neither of us addressed directly. There was a pause as I handed her a small envelope, something left by the landlady. Our fingers brushed briefly, the lightest contact, and yet the warmth of that touch lingered far longer than any ordinary touch should. I felt my heartbeat quicken, a subtle warmth spreading across my chest, and I noticed a faint flush coloring her cheeks as well. Finally, she spoke again, her voice low and steady. "It's unusual, isn't it? How moments like this just happen." Her words were casual, but the way she looked at me, curious, gentle, slightly teasing, made it clear that she knew the effect of her presence. I nodded, unable to find words that wouldn't seem awkward. Instead, I let a quiet smile linger, hoping it conveyed the mix of surprise, intrigue, and subtle admiration I felt. For the first time, I realized that this simple, ordinary interaction had begun to feel extraordinary, charged with a slow, simmering tension neither of us fully understood yet. And in that moment, just standing there in her quiet living room, I sensed that our connection, gentle, respectful, and unspoken, was only beginning that I stepped fully into the apartment, closing the door quietly behind me, and the warmth of the late afternoon sunlight wrapped around the room like a gentle embrace. The faint aroma of coffee and vanilla lingered in the air, creating a comforting cocoon that contrasted sharply with the fluttering nervousness in my chest. My eyes were immediately drawn back to her, seated gracefully on the sofa, legs tucked casually beneath her, a book resting in her lap that she barely seemed to notice. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a strange tug, an almost magnetic pull that made my feet hesitate mid-step. There was a calm confidence in the way she held herself, yet something softer flickered in her gaze, a quiet curiosity, an unspoken acknowledgement of the oddness of our encounter. Her lips curved into a soft, knowing smile, the kind that made you want to stay a moment longer just to see it linger. "I wasn't expecting you so soon," she said, her voice warm and steady, carrying an easy rhythm that seemed to settle the anxious tension in my chest. Her eyes, however, lingered on mine just a second too long, and I felt a slight hitch in my heartbeat. I realized I was noticing everything. The soft fall of her hair around her face, the delicate movement of her hands as they rested on the book, the subtle way sunlight highlighted her features. I noticed the key," I stammered, trying to sound casual. I didn't want it just to stay there. My words felt clumsy, but the honesty in them seemed to draw a gentle acknowledgement from her. She laughed softly, a sound that was light but not fleeting, a quiet musicality that seemed to fill the small room. "Thoughtful of you," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that was both unconscious and intimate, a small motion that left a faint warmth lingering in the space between us. We exchanged small talk, comments on the weather, the quiet of the neighborhood, my landlady's absent-minded habits, but beneath each sentence, a subtle tension hummed. Every glance carried weight. Every gesture seemed amplified in the soft lighting of the room. I noticed the way she tilted her head while listening, the faint crinkle near her eyes when she smiled, and the tiny moments when our gazes met and lingered, as if daring the other to break the silent connection. When I handed her a small envelope left by the landlady, our fingers brushed, just briefly, but the warmth of that contact lingered in my chest, a spark that seemed far too potent for such a simple gesture. I felt my pulse quicken, aware of the magnetic pull that was neither unwelcome nor appropriate, yet undeniably present. Her voice broke the silence, gentle but deliberate. "It's strange, isn't it? How unexpected moments can feel significant." Her eyes were soft but steady, watching me as if testing whether I would meet her gaze or shy away. I nodded, offering a quiet smile that conveyed curiosity, surprise, and something deeper I wasn't ready to name. For the first time, a simple, everyday interaction felt extraordinary. There was a slow, simmering tension between us, respectful, tender, and unspoken, that made the ordinary feel charged with possibility. And in that quiet living room, as sunlight pooled across the floor and dust motes floated lazily in the warm air, I sensed that something subtle and meaningful had begun, a connection neither of us fully understood, yet both of us felt profoundly. The apartment felt smaller now, though it hadn't changed in size. Somehow, her presence had made the space feel more intimate, charged with an unspoken tension I hadn't anticipated. I had moved toward the sofa to place my bag down, careful not to disturb anything, when my hand brushed hers as we both reached for the small cushion at the same time. The contact was fleeting, barely a second, yet it lingered in my nerves far longer than it should have. Her hand was warm, softer than I expected, and when our eyes met, I saw a subtle flicker, curiosity, amusement, perhaps something unspoken. I quickly withdrew, but the faint electricity of that accidental closeness stayed with me, a reminder of how something as simple as touch could feel loaded with meaning. We began to settle into the room, finding a rhythm in our movements. She shifted slightly on the sofa, leaning just enough that her shoulder brushed mine. I froze for a moment, acutely aware of the warmth radiating from her. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, casting delicate patterns on the floor, highlighting the gentle contours of her face, the soft line of her jaw. Every detail seemed intensified, as if the ordinary world had sharpened just to make me notice her more vividly. She laughed again at something I said, light and effortless, and it resonated somewhere deep in my chest. There was no urgency in her movements, yet everything about her presence demanded attention. I found myself leaning slightly closer, not intentionally, not consciously, but the shift brought our knees just short of touching. The proximity was intoxicating, subtle, and entirely safe, yet my heart pounded with a nervous awareness I could not deny. I handed her the cup of coffee I had brought for myself, and she reached out to take it. Our fingers brushed once more, and this time, I didn't pull away immediately. The warmth of her hand, the slight pressure of her grip, and the gentle tilt of her head as she smiled made the moment feel intimate, almost delicate in its vulnerability. It was an accidental closeness, yet it carried more meaning than words ever could. She shifted again, resting her elbow lightly against mine as she gestured toward a photo on the wall. I caught myself noticing the small details, the way her skin glowed in the afternoon light, the faint scent of her perfume that lingered near her, the subtle rise and fall of her chest as she spoke. Everything about her presence seemed deliberate and unintentional at the same time, like she was both unaware of the effect she had on me and entirely aware of it in the same moment. A quiet silence fell between us after a few moments, punctuated only by the distant hum of traffic outside and the soft tick of a wall clock. I realized that in all the brief interactions we'd had, in every small gesture and glance, a slow, simmering connection had begun to form. One built not on words, but on the electricity of closeness, accidental yet impossible to ignore. And as I sat there, aware of the subtle heat radiating from her presence, I understood that these moments, soft touches, shared laughter, lingering glances, were no longer just coincidences. They were the beginning of something delicate, profound, and entirely inevitable. The soft afternoon light had shifted now, slanting lower through the curtains and casting long, warm shadows across the apartment. The earlier tension had settled into a quiet comfort, a kind of intimacy that felt almost sacred. We sat near each other on the sofa, the small space between us charged with unspoken awareness. She closed her book and set it gently on the coffee table, the motion casual but deliberate. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, subtle enough that I almost missed it, yet it made her human, approachable, and undeniably real. I found myself wanting to reach out, to ease whatever weight she carried, even though I barely knew her. "Do you ever feel like life is moving too fast?" she asked suddenly, her voice low, thoughtful, carrying a trace of hesitation. Her eyes didn't meet mine immediately. Instead, she focused on the pattern of sunlight on the floor. The question caught me off guard. I expected small talk, idle pleasantries, but this was different. Vulnerability had entered the room, uninvited yet entirely welcome. I nodded, unsure how much to reveal. "Sometimes," I admitted, my voice quiet. "It's like everything is happening, and you're just watching it go by." My gaze drifted toward her, and I saw a softness there, a quiet understanding that mirrored my own uncertainty. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a weight that made me feel both exposed and accepted. "Exactly," she whispered. "And sometimes you feel like no one really notices. Like the small struggles, the little moments of doubt, are invisible to everyone else." Her hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. I noticed the faint warmth of her skin, the gentle curve of her wrist, and a wave of empathy washed over me. Without thinking, I reached out and handed her the blanket draped over the arm of the sofa. "Here," I said softly. "You might be cold." My fingers brushed hers again, and this time neither of us pulled away immediately. The contact was light, fleeting, yet it carried reassurance, care, and a silent acknowledgement of the fragile honesty we were sharing. She wrapped the blanket around herself, letting it fall partially over my lap as well. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice almost a sigh, and the simple act felt intimate in a way words could not convey. There was a pause, a quiet stillness, where we simply existed together in the shared warmth of the room. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the gentle shift of her body as she settled against the sofa, and I felt a protective instinct stir within me, an urge to safeguard this delicate moment of trust. We talked then slowly, tentatively, about small fears and quiet regrets, childhood memories, past disappointments, fleeting moments of loneliness. Each confession was met with gentle listening, soft smiles, and nods that carried empathy rather than judgment. Every word seemed to draw us closer, weaving an invisible thread of understanding between us. And when our eyes met again, lingering just a fraction too long, I realized that the emotional intimacy, the willingness to share and to listen, to touch gently and to stay present, had transformed our accidental closeness into something far deeper. Something neither of us had expected, yet neither of us could deny. In that quiet living room, sunlight fading into a warm, golden glow, it became clear. The slow burn of connection was no longer just subtle glances or accidental touches. It was the heart of something real, tender, and profoundly human. The room had settled into a calm rhythm, the outside world seeming to fade behind the soft hum of the apartment. Rain began tapping lightly against the windows, a delicate, irregular pattern that made the room feel both private and insulated, as if time itself had slowed just for us. The golden light of late afternoon was fading into a soft, muted glow, casting gentle shadows across the walls and highlighting the subtle contours of her face. We sat close on the sofa, not touching directly at first, yet the proximity was undeniable. Her knee brushed against mine as she shifted to reach for a cup of tea, and I felt a familiar flutter in my chest, a mixture of nervous excitement and warm anticipation. It was a touch so fleeting and innocent, yet it left an echo, a gentle pulse that lingered far longer than it should have. She sipped her tea, eyes momentarily closing as she savored the warmth, and I noticed the tiny details I hadn't before. The curve of her lips, the soft shadow beneath her eyelashes, the faint crease at the corner of her smile that appeared when she relaxed. I found myself memorizing these small, human details without realizing it, drawn in by the subtle intimacy of simply being near her. There was a quiet pause, filled only by the rhythmic tapping of rain. She glanced at me, her eyes meeting mine with that same gentle curiosity and unspoken depth that had been building between us since the first accidental encounter. I realized how aware I was of her. The way she shifted, the scent of jasmine lingering in the air, the warmth radiating from her presence. Every small movement felt magnified, charged with an invisible current of connection. Without thinking, I handed her a small blanket draped over the back of the sofa. Our fingers brushed again, briefly this time, but the sensation was electric in its subtlety. She wrapped it around herself, and the blanket pulled slightly over my leg as well. It was a small, ordinary gesture, yet it felt intimate, an unspoken acknowledgement of closeness, comfort, and mutual awareness. We fell into silence again, each of us absorbing the moment. I could hear her breathing, soft and steady, and felt the quiet pulse of her heartbeat in the calm, almost meditative stillness of the room. There was no need for words. The closeness itself was enough to communicate everything: interest, curiosity, a tentative longing that neither of us had dared to name aloud. When she laughed softly at a comment I made, it was like the room itself exhaled with her. The sound was gentle, melodic, yet it sent a thrill through me I could neither ignore nor fully understand. She noticed my reaction and gave me a teasing, half-smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension simmering between us. As the rain continued to fall and the afternoon light dimmed into a warm, golden haze, I realized the significance of these quiet moments. The touches, the shared glances, the simple act of existing near each other. They were no longer accidental. Each instance, however small, was a thread weaving the two of us closer together, building a connection rooted in comfort, awareness, and the slow, undeniable pull of attraction. In the hush of that room, I understood something important. Love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it lingers in the quiet moments, in the subtle touches, in the warmth of shared presence. And those moments, I knew, were only the beginning. The apartment was bathed in the soft glow of evening now, a mix of the fading sunlight and the gentle golden hue of a single lamp in the corner. Shadows stretched lazily across the walls, and the rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle, a quiet accompaniment to the tense stillness between us. The earlier casualness had dissolved into something heavier, something that neither of us could fully articulate, but both could feel. We sat close on the sofa, the blanket still shared between us, draped loosely over her shoulders and spilling onto my lap. The warmth of her presence seemed almost tangible, a comforting weight that contrasted with the nervous electricity humming through my chest. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of hesitation there, a recognition of the tension that had been building since the first accidental touches. "I don't usually talk about this," she admitted softly, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, as if she were gathering courage, her fingers tracing absent patterns on the blanket. "But sometimes I feel misunderstood. Like people see the surface, the confidence, and they miss the rest." Her honesty hung in the air, delicate and fragile, and I felt a deep empathy stirring inside me. Without thinking, I reached out, lightly brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The motion was slow, deliberate, and gentle, the kind of touch that conveys care without intrusion. She shivered slightly, not from cold, but from the intimacy of the gesture. "I understand," I said quietly, my voice steady even as my pulse raced. I think I see more than most people do." My fingers lingered near her cheek, and she leaned just slightly toward the touch, the faintest tilt that made my heart clench. It was a moment of trust, of connection, and it carried an intensity far beyond the simplicity of the act itself. She smiled softly, a mixture of relief and warmth, and her hand moved instinctively to rest near mine on the blanket. Our fingers brushed, and this time neither of us pulled away. The subtle contact carried a world of emotion, comfort, reassurance, and an unspoken acknowledgement of the feelings that had been simmering between us for days. We spoke then slowly, with pauses heavy with meaning. Our conversation wandered through memories, regrets, and quiet hopes for the future. Each word seemed to draw us closer, weaving a fragile but undeniable bond. I noticed the small details, her eyelashes brushing against her cheeks as she blinked, the faint scent of jasmine that clung to her, the way her shoulder gently pressed against mine as we shifted slightly on the sofa. Every subtle motion heightened the tension, making the emotional closeness almost tangible. There was no need for grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. The intensity of the moment came from the shared understanding, the quiet vulnerability, and the slow recognition of a bond neither of us wanted to rush, but both secretly longed to explore. And as the evening deepened, the rain softened to a drizzle, and the lamp cast a warm, intimate glow around us, I realized that the slow-burn connection, the lingering glances, the gentle touches, the shared silences, had reached its peak. In that quiet, tender space, we had crossed the invisible line between curiosity and affection, between hesitation and trust, and it felt both thrilling and entirely natural. The evening had settled into a serene quiet, the rain outside tapering off to a gentle drizzle, leaving the streets glistening under the soft glow of the streetlights. Inside the apartment, the warm lamplight wrapped the room in a golden haze, highlighting the subtle lines of her face and the delicate curve of her shoulders as she shifted slightly on the sofa. Everything felt slower, calmer, as if the world had paused just for us. We sat close, the shared blanket now loosely draped over both of us, the warmth of her presence lingering in a way that was tangible yet unspoken. Our earlier confessions, touches, and lingering glances had woven a quiet intimacy between us, a bond built on respect, trust, and slow-burning desire. Neither of us had rushed anything, yet the connection had deepened naturally, like sunlight spreading through a room at dawn. "I should probably go," I said softly, though the words felt heavier than they should. The thought of leaving created a small, unexpected ache in my chest. She looked at me, her eyes reflecting the soft light, calm and steady yet carrying a hint of something unspoken. "I know," she replied gently. Her hand moved almost unconsciously, resting lightly on mine for a fleeting moment. The touch was brief but meaningful, a small, deliberate contact that conveyed reassurance, gratitude, and a quiet acknowledgement of the bond we had formed. I felt a warmth spread through me, a mix of comfort and longing, as if that tiny gesture had said more than words ever could. We stood, both moving slowly, reluctant to break the rhythm we had created over the afternoon. She reached out, lightly brushing a hand across my arm as if to anchor the moment. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, soft and subtle, and it seemed to wrap around me like a memory I didn't want to let go of. "Thank you for staying, for listening, for just being here," she murmured, her voice low and sincere. There was no pressure, no expectation, just honest, unguarded emotion. I smiled, a quiet, soft smile that mirrored her warmth, and felt an echo of that connection ripple through me. As I stepped toward the door, our hands brushed once more, this time deliberately, fingers briefly entwining before we let go. The contact was electric in its subtlety, and I caught a fleeting look from her, one filled with a mixture of happiness, acknowledgement, and gentle longing. That look, that moment, encapsulated everything we had shared. The slow build, the accidental touches, the quiet vulnerability, and the unspoken promise of more to come. I paused at the door, glancing back. She was watching me, her expression calm, confident, yet softened by warmth and affection. I nodded slightly, a silent understanding passing between us. This connection, delicate as it was real, and it would continue to grow. Stepping out into the cool, damp evening, I carried with me the lingering warmth of her presence, the subtle brush of her hand, and the memory of her quiet voice. The city streets were familiar, yet everything felt subtly different, as though the world had shifted just enough to remind me that something meaningful had begun, slow and steady, tender and true. Back inside, she sank slightly into the sofa, the golden light casting a halo around her. A small, contented smile curved her lips, a quiet acknowledgement that the day's unexpected encounter had grown into a connection neither of us had expected, yet both had embraced. And in that gentle, unspoken moment, the story of us, a slow-burn romance built on trust, affection, and subtle longing, reached its warm, satisfying conclusion, leaving the promise of more to come without needing to rush, force, or explain.